Chapter 3, Training Together. By the time Evan reached the river the next morning, Bram had already completed one round trip. He came running back from beneath the old willow, his shoes soaked with dew and the hair over his forehead clumped into wet strands. "You're late," he said. Evan bent over with his hands on his knees and took 2 breaths. "It isn't even fully light yet. That's why it's called morning." "Where's Lorne?" Bram glanced back toward the road from the village. "Maybe the dog got him." Neither the miller's dog nor Lorne appeared. A few sheep bleated from across the river. Lee stood beside the shallow ford, using a long branch to coax a lamb that refused to enter the water. Most of the flock had already crossed and were scattered over the low slope beyond, grazing. "If you're going to run, do it now," she called across the river. "Once the sun comes up, they'll start wandering toward the woods." Bram pointed upstream. "We run to the old willow, charge up that slope, then circle back to the village entrance." Lee looked at her sheep. "And what about them? Come back after you finish running." "By the time I finish running, the sheep will have finished running too." Bram clearly had not considered that. "Then run along the river," he amended. "Sheep don't run. They just wander off whenever I'm not looking." Evan took off his half-damp outer shirt and hung it from a low branch beside the river. "We'll do one circuit. She can walk with the flock." Bram frowned. "Does that count as training together? We're all by the river." "That counts." Evan did not answer. Lorne finally appeared at the far end of the village road. He was not running quickly, but he already looked miserable. Bram called at once. "Did the dog bite you?" A piece of wood jammed the water wheel. Lorne stopped beside them and bent over, bracing his hands on his thighs. "My father insisted we pull it out first." "You're already out of breath before we've even started." "I ran here from the mill." "Good, keep running." Lorne raised his head as though he wanted to say something, then settled for another breath. Bram was the fastest. Even after reaching the old willow, he turned around to urge the others on. Lorne refused to fall too far behind and clung to Bram's pace through the first half. Evan kept to his own speed and was still left behind. Before they reached the river slope, Lorne's breathing had already lost its rhythm. Lee drove the sheep along the bank. Her route was nothing like the level village road. She crossed loose stones, circled around brush, and constantly doubled back to bring strays into the flock. As Evan ran up the river slope, he remembered the missing-eared guard turning 1 foot outward. He tried it. It made little difference on level ground, but on the incline his right knee twisted awkwardly inward. Evan immediately returned to his normal stride. Bram saw him, turned his own foot, and swore after only 2 steps. From the opposite bank, Lee called, "Are you sure he wasn't just avoiding the mud?" Evan did not answer. When they returned to the river, he wrote 4 small words along the edge of the thin board, "Wrong on hills." "You're actually writing that down." Bram leaned closer. "Otherwise, I'll try it again in a few days." Lorne sat beside the river, his chest still rising and falling hard. "Don't start so fast next time," Evan said. "Bram dragged me into it." Bram was splashing water over his face. He looked up. "I didn't pull you." Lorne did not have the strength to argue. Lee drove the sheep onto the slope, then waded back through the shallows. Her skirt was wet to the knees, but her breathing was steadier than Lorne's. Bram looked at her. "You didn't run at all." "I walked farther than you did." "Walking doesn't count." "Then go bring back those 3 sheep on the left." Bram looked into the distance. 3 sheep were already close to disappearing into the trees. He did not go. That evening, the 4 of them gathered outside the Holt workshop again. Evan's father was still inside repairing a warped wooden door. The plane scraped over the timber with a dry, repeating rasp. Evan's older brother had taken the place against the wall to sharpen a saw, occasionally looking up at them. Evan set the thin board on an overturned crate. In addition to read, count, and run, it now had several more columns. Number of problems completed, time used, mistakes made, and points needing correction. Large spaces had been left beside each name. Lorne studied it for a long time. What do we do first? Go over the questions we missed yesterday. Why did you draw all these lines? To keep records later. Bram had already poured 12 small copper coins onto the crate. He stared at the coins, then at the equation Evan had written on a scrap of wood. 12 small coppers equals 1 large copper. The double-line symbol was commonly used in county accounts and formal arithmetic. Alden had mentioned it a few times when teaching children their letters, but in the village it was mostly used by people who kept accounts or drafted contracts. Bram normally counted sacks of grain or divided flatbread by handling the actual objects. Evan tapped the left side with his charcoal. 12 small coppers can be exchanged for 1 large copper. You have 29 small coppers. First, take 24 of them and exchange them for 2 large coppers. That leaves 5 small ones. Bram looked at the symbol in the middle. What are those 2 lines? They mean the 2 sides are equal. How are they equal? There are 12 coins on this side and only 1 on the other. They have the same value. Then why not draw 12 little circles and 1 big circle? Evan paused. That isn't how formal arithmetic is written, but it would be easier to understand. Evan tried again, explaining that 1 large copper was worth 12 small coppers, so 29 could first be separated into 2 groups of 12. Bram continued staring at the equal sign. Lorne finished his own problem and glanced over. That's the 3rd explanation you've tried. He asked. He still hasn't understood the first one. Bram scooped a handful of pebbles from the ground, stopped writing for a moment. He counted out 12 pebbles and pushed them into one pile, then placed a larger wood chip beside them. This pile trades for this, right? Right. Bram counted out another 12. Then 2 piles trade for 2 of these. Lee reached over and pushed the remaining 5 pebbles to one side. These can't be exchanged. I know. Bram looked at the equation again. Evan drew a circle around each pile of stones, then wrote 2 large coppers and 5 small coppers beneath them. This time Bram did not ask about the equal sign. He took the charcoal and copied the solution. So you already knew how to do it, Lorne said. I did know, Bram answered immediately. He just wrote it strangely. Evan looked at the board covered in his arrows and did not argue. Lee had been given a problem about wool. There were 2 bundles of freshly shorn wet wool and 1 bundle of dry wool, each sold at a different price. She wrote the answer almost without pausing, but the working Alden required took only 2 lines, and the second line was missing a unit. Lorne turned the board toward himself. Why is something missing here? Nothing is missing. Wet wool has to be reduced. Reduced by how much? That depends on how wet it is. Does the question say? Lee read it again. The question listed only the weight and the discount rate. Then use the rate it gives you. You have to write that step down, Lorne said. The examiners in Pinebridge won't know how your family sells wool. Lee clicked her tongue and added the missing calculation. She had started by writing too large. By the end, she had run out of space and had to squeeze each character along the edge of the board. Her final arrow even curved around to the back. Evan's brother finished sharpening the saw and came over to take a short board from against the wall. Evan put out a hand. We need that one. It's for repairing a cabinet. What about the one beside it? That one too. His brother looked at the thin board on the crate covered in ruled lines. Are you studying or are you planning to measure the entire workshop? Lorne pulled the record board toward himself. I was about to ask the same thing. Evan had planned to record how long each person took, where each mistake occurred, how many attempts were needed, and whether the work was completed. Once they began, he spent so much time looking down to mark the board that he missed 2 of Bram's questions. Lorne took a rag and wiped away half the columns. What we did today, what we still get wrong, what we do first next time, those 3 are enough. We should record time too. Why? The Pinebridge exam might be timed. The village head hasn't said that. That's why we should record it now, Bram interrupted. How long did my problem take? Evan looked at the board. He had been too busy explaining and had forgotten to time it. Lorne wiped away another column. What remained was far less than Evan had originally planned. Bram, coin symbols. Lee, show the working. Lorne, run more slowly. After Evan's own name, Lorne added a line. Don't record too much. Evan looked at him. Lorne had already lowered his head over the next problem. Bram learned to recognize the equals sign, then reversed the conversion between large coppers and silver in another problem. Lee wrote out her working, but squeezed the last two words so tightly that even she could not read them. Lorne had asked about several examination rules, and by the end of the evening he still did not know which of them would actually be used. Evan's record board had been rubbed into a gray-black mess. Over the next several days, they did not always arrive together. When Bram came for the second session, he brought a small bag of stones. He selected 12 of roughly the same size and claimed he had picked them up by chance along the road. Whenever he worked on conversions, however, he always poured them onto the table first. He completed one coin conversion problem correctly. The next day, when the subject changed to dividing grain, he forgot to include the 3 small measures left over in his answer. Lee left her family's old account board in one corner of the workshop. At first it merely leaned against the wall. Later, whenever she came, she walked inside and fetched it herself. One afternoon, a ewe fell ill and she did not appear at all. The 3 boys argued for half the day over a problem involving the net weight of wool. Lorne thought they had to subtract the water. Bram said they also had to subtract the bits of grass stuck in it. Evan searched through Lee's old accounts and found no fixed rate. When Lee returned the next day, she read the problem and said only, "Net wool means the weight after it's washed, dried, and cleaned of debris." The question is missing a sentence at the beginning. Alden had omitted one line while copying it. Evan circled the question and added 2 words in the corner of the board. Ask first. One afternoon, Lorne brought several pieces of broken wheat cake from the mill. He set the paper parcel on the crate and said they had cracked that morning and could not be sold. Lee picked up one piece and turned it over. A whole sesame seed clung to the back, and although one edge was broken, the cake had still been cut into a neat square. Your mill wraps unsellable food very carefully. Broken is broken, Lorne said. Bram had already eaten half of one. They all taste the same. He reached for another, but Lorne held the parcel shut. 2 each. How do you count pieces when they're broken? The 4 of them argued about it for a while. In the end, the largest broken cake was snapped in half. Bram received the smaller piece and spent the rest of the afternoon accusing Lorne of favoritism. Lorne also stopped trying to match Bram's pace at the start of every run. The 3rd time they went to the river, he stood beside Evan and began at a slower speed. Bram ran ahead and turned to urge him on, but Lorne only waved and did not accelerate. That day, he completed the full route for the first time. At the finish, he was still too breathless to speak, but he did not collapse onto the ground as he had on the first day. "See," Bram said, "you learn by running more." Lorne leaned against a tree. A long while passed before he answered. "I finished because I didn't run with you." Bram pretended not to hear. Many people passed through the mill, and Lorne began bringing back bits of news. Some said the Pinebridge entrance examination would require the children to read aloud in public. Others claimed there would only be written answers. One person said the physical test only checked whether they could lift a grain sack, while another insisted there would also be a run over a slope. Lorne always explained where each report came from. This was said by someone who went last year. It might not be the same this year. Or, a merchant who came to grind grain heard this. He didn't even know how many waivers Graybrook received, so don't trust it yet. Some information was eventually confirmed. Other claims were denied by Alden the following day. The lines on the record board grew fewer and fewer. In the end, only 3 marks remained: a short stroke, a cross, and a circle. The stroke meant completed. The cross meant still wrong. The circle meant do this first next time. Ask first remained in one corner of the board, squeezed among the other marks. Bram continued to insist that the circle was unnecessary until he made the same conversion mistake 3 times in a row, and Evan drew 3 circles in the same box. One is enough to see. In case you forget, I won't forget. The next day, it was the first problem he did. On the 8th morning, Evan jogged slowly along the river. Bram was already ahead, with Lorne not far behind him. Lee drove her sheep over the slope on the opposite side, occasionally striking the brush with her branch. Evan adjusted his breathing and tried to keep the faint warmth inside him moving along its usual path. Normally, the moment his pace increased, the warmth scattered. This time, it sank a short distance down the side of his leg. 1 step, 2. Only on the 5th step did Evan realize it was still there. His breathing immediately broke rhythm. The warmth vanished completely. He slowed and tried again, but felt nothing. He made 2 more attempts on the way back and failed both times. Bram called from ahead for him to hurry. Evan wrote a single line in an empty space on the board, appeared once while jogging slowly. There was no circle and no cross. On the evening of the 9th day, Lorne arrived later than usual. He had run all the way from the village hall to the workshop. When he stopped, he first had to brace himself against the doorframe and breathe several times. It's decided. Bram was arranging pebbles as coins. He looked up. What is? The first official test, tomorrow afternoon. Lee lowered the passage she had been reading. What will they test? Reading and writing first, then arithmetic, physical ability last. Will they publish the scores? The village head says he hasn't decided. Lorne frowned. The test is tomorrow and they still haven't decided. Bram immediately swept his stones back into their bag. I'm going to carry the grain sack twice more. Now, Evan asked. When else? Tomorrow. Lee had already begun searching for the official words she had misread before. Lorne wanted to find Alden and ask whether all the arithmetic would use official measures. For a moment, all 4 spoke at once. Evan turned the record board over. Bram still had 1 cross beside coin conversions. Lee had 2 unfamiliar administrative terms. Lorne's running mark had only just changed from a cross to a stroke. Evan still had a circle beside official notation. Don't add anything new tonight, he said. Bram was already on his feet. Carrying sacks isn't new. If your legs hurt tomorrow, will the physical test give you extra points? Lorne asked. Bram looked at him. My legs won't hurt. The last time you said that, you walked like you were stepping on nails the next day. Lee raised her head too. Sit down and count money. Bram finally sat again. Each of them repeated the things they most often got wrong. No one tried to guess whether tomorrow would contain new questions, and no one trained late into the night. After dark, Evan's father came out of the workshop and sent them home. As Bram left, he was still reciting, 10 small coppers to 1 large copper. 12, Lorne said behind him. Bram stopped for 1 step. I know, I'm tired from running. You didn't run today, Lee said. Bram quickened his pace and pretended not to hear. Chapter 4, The Ranking. On the afternoon of the test, the 3 tables outside the village hall stood farther apart than they had during the initial assessment. During the assessment, the children had been free to move around the yard, carrying grain sacks after finishing their arithmetic. This time, 2 or 3 paces separated each table, and the chairs had been turned to face different directions. Parents were required to remain outside the fence. They were not even allowed near the windows. The question sheets lay face down. Alden walked around the tables, placing stones of different sizes on the corners so the wind would not lift them. Evan waited beside the doorway for his name to be called. Taryn stood ahead of him in line, one wrist wrapped in a strip of faded gray cloth. It was the sort of cloth used in the smithy to guard against sparks, and several places along the edge had been burned black. He stood more than half a head taller than Evan, looking down as he picked soot from beneath the nails of his other hand. During the initial assessment, Taryn had been the only child besides Bram who carried the grain sack without changing hands. The blacksmith stood in the middle of the yard, tightening the ropes around the 2 sacks they would use that day. Someone outside the fence asked, "Do the 12-year-olds and the 15-year-olds carry the same weight?" The blacksmith patted the side of a sack. "The notice gives a fixed weight, it doesn't divide by age. Then aren't the younger ones at a disadvantage? We can only follow the notice," the blacksmith said. "When you reach Pinebridge, they may not care to hear explanations about age either." The parents still looked dissatisfied but said nothing more. The village head stood in the doorway holding a hastily copied sheet of rules. Reading and writing, arithmetic and physical ability, 10 points each. The 3 scores will be added together to determine the ranking. This is only the first test. There will be more later. Lorne stood in another line and asked, "All 3 sections are worth 10 points?" "All 3, Lorne nodded and said nothing else. The village head looked down at the paper in his hands as though only then remembering one more detail. "If the total scores are equal, we compare reading and writing first. If those are also equal, we compare arithmetic." Lorne's brows shifted slightly. Alden had already begun calling names. Bram headed toward the empty seat beside Evan, but Alden pointed with his pen to the far side of the yard. "You sit there. The sun is in my eyes over there. It will move later." Bram was about to protest again when the blacksmith coughed behind him. He carried his stool to the assigned place. Lee sat near the window. Lorne was placed at the innermost table, while Taryn remained near the door. By the time Evan sat down, several tables and other candidates separated the 4 of them. Alden turned over the sandglass. "Reading and writing first." The stones were removed from the papers. Soon, the only sounds in the yard were pages turning and charcoal scratching over wood and paper. The first section was dictation. The words were not difficult. Most were commonly used in notices about roads, relay stations, grain, and contracts. Evan wrote steadily until the 4th word, when he paused to confirm the direction of the final stroke. Next came a short passage. It described a relay station receiving 2 shipments and changing a caravan's travel time because a bridge had been damaged. The questions asked why the caravan was delayed and which shipment would leave first. Evan knew both answers after reading the passage once. Writing them down was what took time. His wrist was more practiced than it had been several years ago, but it was still the wrist of a 12-year-old boy. If he wrote quickly, the letters crowded together. If he slowed enough for Alden to read them clearly, he lost time. When Evan completed the first question, Lee was reading aloud at the table ahead of him. She hesitated at the term relay service, first giving it a similar but incorrect sound before correcting herself. Alden did not interrupt. He merely marked something on the sheet in his hand. Lee continued and did not pause again. By the time Evan was called to read, more than half the sand had fallen. He kept his voice steady and did not rush. After returning to his seat, only a little time remained for the final comprehension question. He could have written a fuller explanation, but he removed 2 sentences and kept only the reason for the delay and the name of the shipment sent first. Alden called time just as Evan finished the final word. Bram was still holding his charcoal. He stared at the last line as if trying to add something. Only when Alden came to collect the paper did he set the charcoal down. When the arithmetic sheets were distributed, quiet conversation began again outside the yard. Alden looked up once and the voices fell. The first problem involved official measures. The second used copper coins. The third asked for the distance and travel time between two relay stations. The final problem required a shipment to be divided among 3 wagons according to set proportions. Evan read the entire sheet before beginning. The numbers were not difficult. Several conversions in the first problem could be combined instead of written separately. For the coin problem, he only needed to separate the full large coppers before dealing with the remainder. By the time he completed the first 3 problems, most of the yard was still working on the second. Evan did not immediately continue. He checked the symbols for official and small measures, then checked the remainder in the coin conversion. The stroke Lee had corrected before was no longer reversed. The final problem took more time. The arithmetic itself was simple. The difficulty was that sealed crates could not be divided, while loose cargo could. Evan first calculated the total weight, assigned the 3 complete crates to separate wagons as instructed, then divided the remainder by proportion. When he lifted his head to loosen his wrist, he saw that Lorne was still on the previous problem. Lorne worked more slowly, but every step was neatly written. After finishing each line, he checked the unit against the wording of the question. At another table, one of Bram's hands hung below the edge. His index finger and thumb tapped his knee in turn. 1, 2, 3. After 12, he changed fingers and began again. Evan looked only once before lowering his head. With a little time remaining, he calculated the total cargo again. When the last sand fell, no one continued holding a writing tool. After the reading and arithmetic sections, the tables were moved against the yard wall. The blacksmith planted a strip of red cloth beside a roadside post, then used the toe of his boot to draw a line in the yard where the grain sack had to be placed. The candidates took the physical test in registration order. They had to run to the post and back, then carry the grain sack to the other side of the yard. They could change their grip, but the sack could not touch the ground. Bram was third. While the first 2 children ran, he swung his arms several times. The instant the blacksmith waved, Bram charged forward. The gap between him and the others opened during the first stretch. At the post, he planted 1 foot in the mud and turned with almost no loss of speed. Back in the yard, he bent, caught the sack, and threw it directly over one shoulder. The corner of the sack swung behind him. He crossed the finish and lowered it, but part of the sack landed beyond the line the blacksmith had drawn. "Bring it back," the blacksmith said. Bram turned. "I'm already finished. The sack is outside the line." "Only one corner. One corner is still outside." Bram stared at the line, then had no choice but to lift the sack and move it back 1 step. Only then did the blacksmith record his result. Even with the extra movement, Bram had been much faster than the first 2 candidates. Taran followed him. His start was slower, and his speed changed little after the turn. When he lifted the grain sack, he first pulled it onto his knees, then raised it smoothly from there. The movement was slower than Bram's, but there was no wasted sway. At the finish, the sack landed exactly inside the line. Bram watched and muttered, "He puts it down too slowly." The blacksmith ignored him. Lee finished in the middle during the short run. She shortened her stride before reaching the post. Her turn was not fast, but she did not lose speed on the way back. As during the assessment, she carried the sack in both arms with its base pressed against her waist. Halfway across, she changed the position of one arm without stopping. Before Lorne began, he took 2 deep breaths. Bram called from the finish, "Go faster at the start." Lorne ignored him. He used the pace they had practiced over the past days and only increased it after the turn. His time was not impressive, but he completed the run and did not have to stop while carrying the sack because he was breathing too hard. By the time it was Evan's turn, the sun had moved to the other side of the yard wall. He took his place at the starting line and felt the lingering tightness in his lower legs. The warmth that had remained along his leg for 5 steps flashed through his mind. The blacksmith raised a hand. Evan did not try to reproduce it. He still did not know what had made it work. Changing his breathing now would only ruin the rhythm he had practiced. The blacksmith waved. Evan ran. He was still slower than Lorne and did not close the gap after the turn. Once he lifted the grain sack, his arms began aching quickly. He changed his grip once, then lowered it only after reaching the inside of the line. When he stood upright, he was still breathing hard, but he no longer needed to brace his hands on his knees as he had during the assessment. The blacksmith wrote several marks on the sheet. Evan could not see the score. The final candidate had arrived late with a fever that morning and still needed to complete the reading section alone. After Alden gathered most of the papers, the village head and the blacksmith went inside. The children and parents remained outside. Bram crouched beside the wall and used a twig to recalculate the final cargo problem in the dirt. "I know I got it right," he said. Lorne stood beside him, looking at the 3 piles Bram had drawn. "You left one crate out of the second wagon. That crate can't be divided. It can't be divided, so you put the whole crate in." Bram studied it again and added the missing crate. "I wrote it on the paper," Lee asked. "Do you remember what you wrote, more or less?" "Then you don't remember." Elsewhere, people began comparing answers to the coin problem. Lorne looked toward the child still taking the test beside the window. "Wait until he finishes. The rest of us are done." "We can't compare answers," Bram asked. "He isn't done." Bram followed Lorne's gaze and stopped calling out answers. They waited nearly an hour before the village hall door opened again. The village head came out carrying a large wooden board. It displayed only names and ranking, not the separate scores. The crowd immediately pressed forward. One parent's shoulder blocked Evan. He moved around the other side before seeing the top line. Lorne was first. Lorne stood close to the board, the corner of his mouth already raised. The miller placed a hand on his shoulder and Lorne did not move away. Evan looked down. The second line read Evan Holt. He looked again. It was definitely his name. Something in his chest loosened. The result was better than he had expected. Even if this was only the first test, second place meant the past 10 days had not been wasted. He let himself feel pleased for a moment before looking farther down. Taryn was third. Lee was fourth. Bram was fifth. Lee paused only briefly at her own name before pushing toward the village hall. "I want to see my reading score." Bram counted down from the first line twice. He had already glimpsed the individual physical scores in the blacksmith's hand and knew he had placed first in that section. After finding himself 5th overall, he looked back at the top 3. "How can I be 5th overall when I came first in physical ability?" Alden was standing in the doorway, organizing the line for people to view their section scores. "The 3 scores are added together." Bram did not ask again. He only stared at the 4 names above his. The village head stood beside the board and announced, "These scores will be recorded, but the 3 waivers will not be decided from this test alone. There will be more tests. Attendance and regular performance will also be considered." The smile remained on Lorne's face, but his attention had already shifted to the village head. "Will this test count toward the final waivers?" "It will be considered." "How much?" The village head looked at him. "That has not been decided." Lorne pressed his lips together and did not continue. Only 2 people at a time were allowed inside to view the section scores. When Evan's turn came, Alden copied the 3 numbers onto a narrow strip of paper and pushed it toward him. Reading and writing, 10. Arithmetic, 10. Physical ability, 5. Total, 25. Evan could not help looking again at the 2 perfect scores. Then his gaze fell to the final 5. His satisfaction immediately felt less complete. Alden pointed his pen toward the door. "Keep it safe." Next. When Evan stepped outside, Lee was standing by the window. "I tied with Taryn," she said. 22? Yes. Mr. Alden said his reading score was 1 point higher than mine. She turned toward the room. How much did you deduct for the word I corrected myself? 1/2 a point, Alden answered, and for writing outside the space. Another 1/2. You also made mistakes in dictation and comprehension. Read your slip. Lee unfolded her score slip and stopped asking. Bram was the last to reveal his numbers. When he came out, he raised both hands. 10 in physical ability, Lorne asked, and the others. 6 in arithmetic too. Reading, Bram looked away. 5. That makes 21, Evan said. I know how to add. Bram folded the score slip and tucked it into his belt. Then, I'll improve reading. Taran took his scores and headed toward the smithy. The blacksmith called after him and asked whether he was still returning that evening to work the bellows. Taran nodded and did not look again at his third-place name on the board. Before the crowd dispersed, someone asked whether the next test would cover the same material. Evan and Lorne stood nearby. Both had heard the village head say it had not been decided. The person who asked looked first at Lorne. It hasn't been confirmed, Lorne said. Only then did the man nod. The mother of a lower-ranked child approached the 4 of them. Could you lend us a few of the arithmetic questions you practice so we can copy them? Before Evan could answer, Lee said, You can't take the wool account board. My family still uses it. We don't need the account board. Ordinary questions are enough. All right, Evan said. I'll copy a few for you tomorrow. The woman thanked him and left with her child. The 4 returned home separately. By their original agreement, they were still supposed to practice at the workshop that evening. Evan arrived first. He placed the record board on the overturned crate and set the charcoal beside it, but did not write. Lee came second. She brought the passage from the test and flattened the 2 folded sections. After sitting down, she ran her fingers along the edges once more. Lorne entered holding his score slip. He had copied the top 5 names from the ranking board onto the back. The paper had been folded with perfect care, but he did not place it in his pocket. He left it on his knee. Bram arrived last. After sitting, he emptied his bag of stones onto the crate. 12 stones rolled out, one falling to the ground. He picked it up, then put the stones back into the bag one by one. No one began immediately. The sound of Evan's father hammering wooden pegs came from inside the workshop. Evan pushed the record board toward the center. Bram poured out the stones again. What does 5th place work on first? Reading, Lorne said. His voice sounded no different from usual. Lee pushed the passage to the middle of the crate. Check this line first. I don't want to copy the whole thing again next time. Lorne wrote his scores in one corner of the board. 9, 8, 9. Evan wrote beneath them 10, 10, 5. Lee added 7, 8, 7. Bram wrote only the final 10. The other 3 looked at him. You already know the other 2. Write them down, Lorne said. Reluctantly, Bram added 5 and 6. Evan looked at the 4 lines of numbers. He had scored 1 point higher than Lorne in reading and 2 higher in arithmetic. Across the first 2 sections, he led by 3 points. In physical ability, however, he had scored 4 fewer. Added together, he was 1 point behind. Reading and arithmetic were already perfect. More practice could not raise either beyond 10. If he wanted to make up the difference, he had to improve physically. Yet in the remaining weeks, he could not train his body to Bram's or Taran's level. At the very least, he could not score only 5 again. He also could not let reading or arithmetic decline because he practiced them less. Beneath run beside his name, Evan drew a circle. Beside read and count, he left a short stroke each. Bram stared at Evan's 2 10s. 10 in reading. Yes. Give me 2 points. Learn to pronounce the words first. Bram pulled Lee's passage toward himself. Which one did she get wrong? Lee pointed to the administrative term that had cost her points. Bram stared at it for a long while and mispronounced the first sound. Lee laughed aloud. Evan picked up the charcoal and drew a circle beside the word. Bram immediately flipped the board over. "I can read the back." Lorne turned it face up again. Bram looked at him. "Does first place mean you don't have to run anymore?" "It can," Lorne said, "as long as you guarantee you'll stay fifth next time." Bram snatched the passage back. "Which paragraph?" "The first." He began again from the word he had just missed. This time he still paused, but he did not pronounce it incorrectly. Chapter 5. The Same Words. 2 afternoons after the ranking was posted, Evan was still copying arithmetic problems. He had originally promised only 3. The woman who came to collect them stood outside the workshop with her son. After reading the first wooden slip, she asked, "There aren't any answers." Evan stopped his charcoal. "Let him solve them first." The boy's name was Noel. He had ranked 7th, and his hands and cuffs always carried a layer of black dust that never seemed to wash away. His family burned charcoal west of the village. At home, they used wooden tally sticks to record how many baskets had come from each kiln, and he rarely calculated on paper. The woman looked troubled. "Even if he finishes them, no one at home will know whether they're right." Evan had to add the answers on another thin scrap of wood. "Don't show him this first. Let him check after he's done." "What about the steps?" Evan looked up. "What? Didn't Alden say Pinebridge might look at the working? If you only give him the answers, he won't know where he went wrong." She had a point. Evan found another shaving of wood and broke the official measure conversion into several steps. By the time he was writing the second problem, Noel had crouched beside the workshop door and was picking at a charred tally stick with one fingernail. The woman thanked Evan repeatedly after receiving the 3 wooden slips and led Noel away. Before long, another household arrived. The parents saw 2 sets of questions on the table and first asked whether a copy could be made. Then he set down the copper coin problem his own child had missed the day before. "Could you check whether only the last step is wrong?" Evan had assumed copying one set would be quick. The second set needed different numbers, or the children could simply copy each other's answers. The writing on the coin problem was cramped together as well. Evan studied it for some time before realizing the child had exchanged 1 large copper for 10 small ones. By the time that family left, 3 unplaned wheel spokes were waiting against the workshop wall. Evan's father carried out a wheel hub and set it on a low stand. "Those pieces need to be sorted today." "I'll do it in a moment." His father glanced at the wooden slips on the table. "How many more?" Evan did not know either. "There shouldn't be any." His father turned the hub halfway and inspected its holes. "Finish whatever you promise other people yourself. You can't use the family's work to make room for it." "I know." His father said no more and returned to adjusting the holes in the hub. Evan finished copying the final question and flexed his wrist. Holding the charcoal for so long had left a black mark along the side of his middle finger, and his knuckles had stiffened. When Lorne arrived at the workshop, 2 sets of uncollected problems still lay on the table. He picked up one slip, read the question on the front, then turned it over. "You added the answers too. No one at their homes can check them. You promised all of these." Evan looked toward the wall. The 3 wheel spokes were still leaning where his father had left them. It was only one set at first. Lorne put the slip back. "Are you running tonight?" Evan did not answer immediately. It would be dark soon. If he went to the river now, he would return and have to sort the timber in darkness. If he did the workshop work first, there would be no time to run. Lorne took off his outer shirt and laid it over a crate. "I'm going first. Come if you come." He did not wait for an answer before heading down the village road toward the river. Evan did not follow. The following evening, the chapel grounds were opened for the first practice session involving all 8 applicants. Alden carried the long table he normally used for contracts to the doorway and brought out several low stools. There was not enough seating. The remaining children balanced wooden boards on their knees or lay over the edge of the stone steps to write. Parents could accompany them only as far as the fence. One father stood near the doorway for a long time. Alden tapped the doorframe. "The child can stay." "You should go. I'm not answering for him. If you stand behind him, he'll keep turning around to look at you." The man finally walked away. Noel sat beside Bram and had brought a bundle of thin wooden sticks cut to equal length. One end of each stick was marked with white ash, the other charred black. When his family burned charcoal, they used the different colors to track kilns that had been sealed, emptied, or prepared for transport. Bram arranged 12 small copper coins on the table. 12 of these trade for one large one. Noel arranged 12 sticks. "How many bundles make a silver coin?" Bram paused. "Forget silver for now. You still miscount large coppers." "I didn't miscount. The writing on the question was crowded. Crowded writing doesn't turn 12 into 10. "Then why did you write 10 last time?" Bram turned his head away. Evan sat at the other end of the long table, checking answers for the problems he had copied the day before. He had expected Noel to need everything explained from the beginning. In fact, once the tally sticks were laid out, Noel understood grouping very quickly. What he did not recognize well were formal numbers and units. Bram did not explain it in the same way Evan had. "Tie these 12 into one bundle. That bundle is one large copper. Anything left that isn't enough for 12 stays to the side. What if there are 23? One bundle and 11 left. 24? 2 bundles." Noel nodded and wrote the answer on his board. His equal sign was still crooked, but he did not ask why the 2 sides looked different. Later, 2 other children borrowed half of his tally sticks. The chapel yard was much noisier than the 4-person sessions at the workshop. Whenever one child misread a word, 3 others corrected it at once. Someone took the wrong board and spent a long time working before noticing the question was different. Alden had begun at the doorway answering questions, but soon 2 parents were calling to him from beyond the fence, asking whether the next test date had been set. Then a woman arrived with news. Her husband had helped unload a caravan that afternoon. A driver coming from the direction of Pinebridge had told him that the Winter Academy valued field ability more highly. The physical score in the village's next test might be worth more. The driver said places that send people into the field have no shortage of children who can write a few words, the woman said from outside the fence. They want people who can run and carry. 2 children immediately stopped writing. One parent asked, "Then why are they practicing so much reading? Wouldn't 2 more runs tomorrow morning be more useful?" Evan was returning a coin conversion problem to Noel. "The village head hasn't announced anything," he said. "Don't change your training because of this yet." The parent looked at him. "But the driver came from Pinebridge, didn't he?" Someone nearby added that if the Winter Academy selected people for field teams, it would not be strange for physical ability to matter more. Evan said nothing further. Lorne had been called inside the chapel to help Alden find an old notice. When he came back carrying the paper, the woman repeated the story. Lorne's first question was, did the driver ever take the academy examination himself? No, he carries freight with a caravan. Then how does he know what the village will put in the next test? The woman opened her mouth but did not answer. Lorne set the notice on the table. Don't change anything because of this yet. The driver never took the examination. The parent who had asked before hesitated. Then we'll wait. People still murmured that extra physical training could do no harm, but no one continued urging the children to put away their writing boards at once. Noel sat beside Evan and snapped one tally stick in half. That's what I said too. You didn't say anything. I was calculating silver. Evan glanced at him and continued checking the problems. After a while, another child brought Lorne a problem involving official measures. Halfway through reading, Lorne noticed that it mixed sealed barrels and loose grain. He pushed the board toward the far end of the long table. Take this to Evan. He had a perfect arithmetic score last time. Then he lowered his head to his own reading exercise without waiting for Evan's response. The child carried the board over. After reading it, Evan found that the arithmetic was not the real difficulty. One line mixed village measures with official measures without saying where the conversion should occur. "Separate this line first," he said. The child crouched beside him while Evan read it again. By the time the public practice ended, there was not enough daylight for Evan to complete his planned 2 circuits by the river. He had also finished only half his own reading exercise. On the way home, someone caught up with him and asked whether he could copy another set of problems the next day. Before agreeing, Evan asked, "Was the child at the chapel today?" "Something came up at home." "Have him come and work here tomorrow. I won't copy a separate answer sheet." The person seemed about to object, but finally said he understood. On the third afternoon, Lorne brought an old form much larger than an ordinary question sheet. The paper had yellowed. Each corner had a nail hole, and the name of a relay station was printed across the top. Many straight lines divided it into columns for date, caravan, cargo, number of pieces, weight, arrival time, and notes. Oil had soaked into 2 places and blurred the writing. "Where did you get that?" Bram asked. "Someone came to the mill today who used to register freight at a northern relay station." Lorne carefully spread the paper over the crate. This was an unused form he kept. Evan leaned closer. The form had many columns, but the arrangement was not unfamiliar. The abbreviations were what made it difficult. Some symbols appeared to mark units of weight, while others might indicate types of wagon. Lee pointed to the columns for number of pieces and weight. "This is printed wrong." "It's blank," Bram said. "The headings, number comes first and weight second, but the units below them are reversed." Lorne looked. He said it was never officially used. Maybe he kept it because the printing was wrong. "Then what is it useful for?" Bram asked. "The man said that when relay stations hired helpers, they sometimes read out a list of cargo and made the applicants fill in a form," Lorne said. "I thought the academy might test something similar. Did he say the academy tests it?" "No. So you guessed." "Yes," Lorne answered without hesitation. Then he added, "We have to return it tomorrow morning. We can't take the original to the chapel, and we can't get it dirty." Evan traced the columns with one finger. Copying information into the form would not be difficult if it were spoken in the same order. In actual use, the report would not follow the columns. A driver might give the cargo first and the date afterward. He might mention the weight before adding that 2 crates were damaged. Lorne made Bram turn his back to the form and read out a report he had invented. "North River Caravan arrived on the afternoon of the 17th. 6 sacks of dried beans, 2 large measures each. 2 crates of salt, one with a split wooden corner." "Too fast," Bram said. "People at a relay station won't wait for you to finish every word. But you can't put the date after the caravan. They might say it that way." Evan first wrote several keywords on an empty board, then placed them into the columns. Date: North River, beans 6, salt 2, 1 damaged. He omitted most complete words. While filling the form, however, he hesitated at the cargo weight. Lorne had said that each sack of beans contained 2 large measures, but he had given no weight for the salt crates. The 2 could not be added together. Lee looked at Evan's notes. 6 sacks of dried beans, 2 large measures per sack. You only wrote 6. You didn't write per sack. Evan added a small mark. Bram was still thinking through the spoken report. "There were obviously 3 wagons. Why doesn't the form say so?" "I never said 3 wagons, Lorne replied. "You said North River Caravan. A caravan doesn't mean 3 wagons. That much cargo wouldn't fit on 2 small wagons. They might have been large wagons." Bram frowned, clearly unconvinced. The 4 took turns reading reports. Lorne understood the official abbreviations best, yet once placed the arrival time in the departure column. Lee rarely forgot the weight, but her handwriting still became cramped. Bram could not remember a complete sentence, though he noticed whether the cargo could actually fit on the wagons more readily than the others. Evan omitted the least but completed the form correctly only once. As darkness approached, Noel arrived to collect the arithmetic problems he had not finished the day before. He reached the workshop door and saw the large sheet on the crate. "What is that?" Lorne immediately pressed down one corner, though he did not put the form away. "An old blank relay station form. It isn't an exam paper." Noel stepped closer. "Can I look too?" "Not at the original," Lorne said. "It's borrowed. We can't have a crowd passing it around, and it has to be returned tomorrow morning." Noel stopped at the door. "Will you copy one?" No one answered at once. Copying every column would take at least half an hour. Adding the abbreviations and explanations would take longer. Noel looked at the four of them. "I was only asking." Evan handed him the previous day's arithmetic board. "Do this first." Noel took it, walked a few steps, then looked back. "Charcoal burning has records for loading and unloading the kilns too. If you redraw the form, I can bring our family's tally system." "Tomorrow," Lorne said. Noel nodded and left along the village road. Bram looked at the form. "If we copy one now, he can see it tomorrow." "If we copy it, we won't have time to practice," Lee said. "Haven't we already seen it? Seeing it isn't the same as knowing it." Lorne flattened the form again. "Understand it tonight. After we return it tomorrow, we'll see how much we can remember." Evan studied the ruled columns. If one person copied the whole form, most of the evening would be spent drawing lines. If all four copied different sections, the pieces might not match. "Each of us remembers 2 columns," he said. "Don't copy the shape. Record the headings and common abbreviations." "I don't want notes," Bram said. "Notes are what you forgot most often," Lorne replied. Bram was assigned number of pieces and notes. He protested twice and failed to exchange them. Each person recorded their assigned part on a wooden board. Lorne circled several uncertain abbreviations to ask about when he returned the form. Evan did not copy the outer lines. He only recorded the order of the columns and 2 shortened symbols. Someone called Evan's name from outside the workshop. The parent who had come the day before stood there with another board. The child had completed the first 3 questions and wanted Evan to correct them that evening so he could continue the next morning. Evan went to the doorway and glanced at the fading light. "Bring him to the chapel tomorrow and do it together. He has to help drive the family cart tomorrow." Then the day after. "Can't you look at it tonight?" "No," Evan said. "I'm not copying anything tonight." The parent looked into the workshop, perhaps trying to see what the 4 were doing. Lorne was placing the old form between 2 thin boards so the raised paper corners would not bend in the wind. Only the columns each of them had copied remained on the crate. The parent finally took back the board. The day after, then, Evan returned to the crate. Bram looked up. "You aren't helping him." "I'll look at it at the chapel the day after tomorrow." Evan sat down and continued memorizing his 2 columns. Before the second public practice session, Lorne went to the chapel first. He told Alden what he had learned while returning the form and placed the columns the 4 of them had copied on the table. Alden studied them for a long while. "The next test may include recording spoken information," Bram asked at once. "Using this form?" "Not necessarily," Alden said. "The village head only said he might read a passage and have you record the time, quantity, and place. Where will we find enough paper for everyone to fill out a full relay station form?" Lorne spread out the simplified version he had redrawn. Only 5 columns remained: time, origin, cargo, quantity, notes. There was no caravan name, and several abbreviations of uncertain use had been removed. After all 8 children sat down, Lorne copied the 5 headings onto the chapel's large wooden board. Someone asked, "How are we supposed to record an entire spoken passage?" Lorne turned toward Evan. "You do it. You missed the least yesterday. Evan took the charcoal. He asked Alden to read the passage once. Greystone Village caravan, arriving on the morning of the 20th, 8 baskets of charcoal and 4 sacks of dried beans. They were caught in rain on the road, and the outer layers of 2 bean sacks became damp. Evan wrote only several brief notes in the corner of the board. 20th morning, Greystone, charcoal 8, beans 4. Damp 2. Only afterward did he transfer them into the columns. You don't have to write every word as it's spoken, he said. Catch the numbers and the goods first. Don't miss the origin or the time. Noel sat in the front with his black and white tally sticks beside him. You didn't write the unit after dried beans. Evan looked at the board. He had written only beans 4, and when transferring the note into the form, he had still forgotten to add sacks. He added the missing word. And the 2 damp sacks weren't missing cargo, Lee said. That belongs in notes. Then put it in notes, Lorne said. Bram spoke from the side. You missed a column yesterday, too. I missed the arrival time. Missing is missing. Several children laughed. Alden tapped the table with his pen. Again. He changed the cargo. This time he described the damage first, gave the quantity second, and added the arrival time last. All 8 children lowered their heads together. Charcoal began scratching across the wooden boards.